what tastes good is relevant to how healthy the individual is. Both literally and figuratively. I mean, when I was unhealthy and didn't know any better, McDonald's tastes good, right?
Right.
So, it's not until you start on your own journey of creating health for yourself that you start to have a discernment around what tastes healthy, what tastes good, but how it actually makes you feel.
Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today's guest is chef, author, and performance coach Jo Rushton. Jo is the co-founder and director of Bhavana Organic Farm and Cooking School in Australia, as well as a nutritional coach, energy therapist, and a member of the CHEK Faculty. She is the author of 2 Amazon #1 bestsellers, so stay tuned to the end of the podcast for a special offer on Jo's best-selling book, Rocket Fuel on a Budget.
Well, welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek, and today my guest, as Penny has already told you in the introduction, is the amazing Jo Rushton. Jo, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and spending time with you.
I'm excited to share. I wanted to begin by just sharing a little bit about our relationship so people know how it is that I chose you to be on the podcast and why. Jo, when did you first start taking courses from me? When we first met?
Oh my goodness. It's got to be over 12 years ago. I'd say about 15 years ago, maybe, around the 2008, I think.
Yeah. Was it when I was touring through Australia giving lectures or something?
It was. The very first time that I came to your class was you were doing an advanced Swiss ball class. And that was my actual first introduction to using a Swiss ball.
Cool. So in that time, we've done a lot of things together. You went through HLC 1, HLC 2, HLC 3 instructor training, and now you're one of our prized and beloved instructors, which is awesome. In the time I've known you, you've done, how many mystery school trainings have you done? You've done more than one, haven't you?
I'm just about to complete my 4th.
Your 4th. I know you've done a lot of them, and you've shared some of the amazing homework that you've done and some of the neat spiritual writings that have come through you. And you and I are both lovers of art. And for those of you that don't know it, Jo is an absolutely amazing artist. I always love to see her art. And her and I have done a lot of mandalas together for our spiritual healing ceremonies that we've done together, which we've done a few of now. And Jo started with me as a personal trainer. You're a chef. You've got all sorts of skills. You're quite a well-known Australian TV personality. I've seen some clips from your TV shows, and they're awesome. What am I missing? I know there's more.
Paul, I think you've really encompassed everything there. I started out, I left school, went to catering college and studied catering, which included becoming qualified chef within that. And then from there I traveled. That was my biggest thing, was leaving home. I think I left home at 17 or 18. I just turned 18. And for me, I just wanted to travel and cook and see the world and experience different cuisines. And I did that for a few years and, would always sort of literally go back home just to take stock and, just find out where I was going to go next. And so by the time I had done America, South Africa, Channel Islands, and then I decided Australia was going to be my next adventure. And when I got here, there was something about Australia that I just knew straight away that it was going to become home.
Right on.
And it has since 96 98 when I moved out here as a backpacker. I never left.
Well, that's working for you. And, of all the places I travel in the world, the place that feels closest to home to me is Sydney, because it's very similar to San Diego. And I have many great friends like you that I get to visit when I go there. So I feel like I'm going to see my extended family and my beautiful soul sister, Jo Rushton. So tell us a little bit. Our topic today is your absolutely gorgeous book, Rocket Fuel on a Budget, How to Get Healthy Without Going Broke. And I wrote a foreword to that. And when did you first publish this book?
Wow, I've got to go back and have a look. I think it was 2013.
Okay, so it's by no means out of date. I can tell you that. I just read through it maybe a week ago or so when I was preparing for the podcast with you, and I was just totally blown away at how beautiful it was. Of course, I read it when it first came out, and then I wrote the foreword for you, but it's been sitting on my shelf for a number of years. And when I picked it up, I went, wow, this is a damn good book right here. And I'm really excited to talk about this book because it's loaded with amazing gems, and it's very practical. It's in plain language. It's not over the top heady. I think any mother or teenager or bachelor could understand it. I'm curious, what were some of the kind of developmental events in your life or experiences that led you to writing Rocket Fuel on a Budget, How to Get Healthy Without Going Broke?
Well, I think, so my first 12 years was spent as a chef, traveling and gaining the knowledge and the skills of a chef. Although, I think we'll talk a little bit later that that's a very different way of working with food to how I work with food now. But nonetheless, it gave me the foundations. And when I arrived in Australia, I was still working, that was still my trade, so to speak. I hadn't made a transition at that point. Back in 98, I was still very much my role in life. What I was following was my love of and passion of food. So the knowledge that I gained around every area of commercial cooking, and then my own personal journey into, I guess, my own health issues. I found myself in a situation of working too much, and I had a lot of health issues going on, and then my own self-exploration into health and wellness. I got to a point where my passion for cooking in the manner in which I was cooking, I was losing the inspiration for. And that's when I found I made a transition, first of all, into personal training. All those years ago, I, took Cert 3, Cert 4 in personal training. And it was about a year and a half after I did that I was introduced to you. In fact, do you remember Alan Gall?
Vaguely, yes.
So he was an early adopter of your, of all of your teachings. And he said, "Jo, I think you'll really love, what Paul Chek's got to say, around food and exercise and health and well-being." And so that's how I got introduced to the CHEK Institute. And I, first of all, came along, and as I mentioned before, my first experience with you was within one of your live classes teaching advanced Swiss ball training. And then I went and did HLC1 with Dr. Oliver.
Oh, right.
And from there, my whole world sort of opened up to a very different view. And as I transitioned into the industry of health, wellness, and personal training at that time, I guess the book came about from after a number of years of supporting clients to make healthier food choices, understand how to work with food. I was always being asked for recipes, when they knew that I was a chef. And of course, I would, provide recipes freely with them. And part of working with my clients always included a half day of practical, what I used to call a pantry overhaul. I'd used to go around to their house, and we'd spend pretty much 4 or 5 hours going through the pantry. I'd give them a shopping list and tell them where to shop, and they would come home and there would be all the produce there ready for us to work with. And I'd spend, 3 or 4 hours in the kitchen showing them how to actually work with the food, so we could put practicality into what I was, the theory of what I was coaching and teaching them. And then really the book came from there. They just kept on asking me, you should really write a book. And the conversation around the quality of food and the sourcing of food was always a big conversation with clients around organic and, really paying attention as to where we were choosing to spend our money. And of course, the challenge of buying organic was obviously a topic I had to overcome with my clients. And that's really how Rocket Fuel came about, was addressing the needs of my clients and then putting it together in I guess I was thinking of a handbook of sorts at first, and it just turned out to be Rocket Fuel on a Budget. That the title came to me one morning. I woke up and it was just there. I went, oh my God, Rocket Fuel. That's what everyone wants, but they want it on a budget.
Yeah.
So, that's really how it was birthed.
So I'm wondering if you can share, coming into my program and, my teachings, especially the HLC training, Holistic Lifestyle Coach training, as an already trained chef, I'm wondering, as you were sitting in those classes, what were some aha moments that you had as a chef, as a trainer, that have ultimately been formative forces on your book, Rocket Fuel on a Budget?
Oh, Paul, so many. The ahas that I think that are relevant are the ones that have really stuck with me. And the first one that comes to mind is health and fitness aren't synonymous. They're not one of the same.
Right.
And I think that I certainly was, all those years ago, uneducated. I didn't have that wisdom. I figured if you're fit, you're healthy. And it's, I think that a lot of people have that mindset that if they go to the gym, that they're cardiovascularly fit, that they have an element of strength to them, that they assume that that's healthy. It's a component of health, but it certainly isn't when we're looking at holistic health. So I think that was a massive aha moment for me. And of course, I've seen that with so many of my clients, the symptoms that they come to see me with, that, they might well be fit, but what's happening on the inside is a very different picture. I think another one for me is the deeply profound wisdom in your teaching. You are what you eat, and you are what you eat eats. For me, that's a concept that encompasses such depth and breadth of a holistic understanding for what our bodies, how our bodies work at a biological level, but what they actually need at a biochemical level, and even how that affects our, physiology and our psychology. And I think that, that one sentence is thrown about these days and is probably overused and misunderstood. If you really sat and contemplated and reflected on the depth and breadth of what that actually means, I think you have the whole workings of the body at a holistic level. So
yes, it's very true.
That sticks with me greatly. Another aha moment for me through the HLC, probably more in level 2, was the awakening to how the unseen and the intangible is always affecting the seen and measurable. That's been a massive mind-blowing experience for me on many levels. And of course, that comes from the two forces and how they work together, the yin and the yang. So that the teachings that you offer, which I think I've not experienced the teachings anywhere else that have been so profoundly synthesized in a manner in which it's the teachings of the universe. So we're talking about complexity beyond mind.
Yes.
And yet you're able to synthesize them into a teaching model that the mind, the ego can accept, and also open into a higher mind of investigation and inquisitiveness that will take you beyond just what the ego wants to know and understand. So I think the two forces for me have been deeply profound, and the law of polarity that they sit behind. They're our greatest teachers.
Yes.
And so, I always remember in HLC 1, day 3, and this memory came to me, I think, on the third HLC 1 that I was actually teaching. I was halfway through teaching the 3-day course, and I'm sharing something, and all of a sudden I get this, oh my God, do you remember in HLC 1 when you were a student and on day 3 you were sitting there? And I had this full-on body experience of remembering how I had said to myself, how awesome would it be to one day teach this? And then, of course, the realization that I was standing there doing so.
Yes.
It was a really almost kind of like deja vu sort of experience. I was like, oh my God, I so remember me saying that to myself, on day 3, the first time I was a student with Dr. Oliver of HLC 1, and now here I am teaching it, and then, of course, going on to teaching level 2. So, I mean, there's some of the aha moments that have not just stuck with me, but continue to be my teacher and continue to be the force of what helps me to grow.
Well, it's lovely to hear. The reason I'm asking is because you came into my program as many do. As you know, we have doctors and chiropractors and osteopaths and all sorts of people with fancy degrees. And a lot of people come in with this question, like, what the hell is this guy going to teach me? He doesn't even have a degree, or they all have their little inner story. And a lot of them come very skeptical. But as you well know, because now you teach a lot of them, they walk out usually going, oh my God, and they realize for the first time they're actually understanding things that they tried to learn before but couldn't get to fit together in their head, or there was too much conflicting information. And since you wrote such a beautiful book, I was just wanting to take the opportunity for the listeners to share some of the developmental steps that you went through and your life experiences that led you to sharing this from a special place of it not being just an intellectual process or a cut and paste of me or anybody else, but your own inner organic process of applying all these teachings in your life and in your professional life. And so I think that really sets us off nicely. And as a chef, I'm wondering, what are some of the biggest misconceptions professional chefs make about food and food preparation today? And what should people be aware of in regard to this when they're eating out, particularly if they do it frequently? I mean, I lived on the road for over 20 years on airplanes and living out of restaurants. And, you can think you're eating at the best restaurants, but once you start learning about your food intolerances and food quality and all the different things that are going on in the kitchen that the chefs think are the iron rule and the law of the chef god or whatever, you start realizing, oh my God, I cannot keep myself healthy even eating in the best restaurants. So just to restate the question, what are some of the biggest misconceptions professional chefs make about food and food preparation? And what should people be aware of in this regard when eating out, particularly if they do it frequently?
Well, if there's one thing that I know for sure that I've come to experience, and that is an unhappy chef makes for a really unpleasant meal.
And there's a lot of them out there.
And there's a lot of them out there. And that's when I knew that I had to make a transition in what I was doing, because my passion for how I was working with food wasn't there anymore. And, as we know, our consciousness and our frequency, our state of being infuses into everything that we choose to do in life and all of our choices. And so, as a chef that is working, when they're working consciously with food, and qualify, I guess, what I mean consciously with food, when they have an appreciation for food as your medicine, and they have an appreciation for food preparation and cooking processes to actually bring out the potential of, or enhance the potential of food, then the experience can be quite amazing. But I was a chef back then that was focused very much on what a lot of commercial chefs are focused on, which is making food look good and taste good, and not really have an appreciation for healthy food practices or cooking processes. And of course, what tastes good is relevant to how healthy the individual is. Both literally and figuratively. I mean, when I was unhealthy and didn't know any better, McDonald's tastes good, right?
Right.
So, it's not until you start on your own journey of creating health for yourself that you start to have a discernment around what tastes healthy, what tastes good, but how it actually makes you feel. And so I think that, some of the biggest misconceptions for commercial chefs out there today is that because there's a lack of knowledge around, things as simple as the type of fats to use within cooking, you can go to a fancy restaurant and food be presented well, and, they're working with whole food. But if their cooking methods aren't, adhering to some of the basics that we know around, using particular fats, saturated fats, most ideal for cooking and being exposed to temperatures, you can still be at a well-regarded restaurant and they're still using polyunsaturated oils for cooking in and so forth. So it really is matching the knowledge and appreciation for food with the skill and artistry of how to work with food. And I think that that's more and more today, with chefs like, Pete Evans, and I love the podcast that you did with Pete on his podcast.
Great, thank you.
I think that's the major differentiating factor is the knowledge that the chefs have, and they are getting, with cooking shows that there are available to us today, even what Jamie Oliver brings about, which isn't necessarily the education specifically around nutrients and specific foods for specific cooking processes, but he's bringing a lot of awareness to, food. What is real food? Where does it come from?
Yes, I love his work.
Yeah, I do too. I think he's, and his passion. I mean, who doesn't want to go and cook something that you just watched him produce? His passion and what he infuses into the food just through his consciousness is just so beautiful. So I think, if you're eating out, they're the things that you've really got to be mindful of. And, these days there are, if you're a little bit of education, I mean, we have an amazing selection of cafes out here today. I mean, one of my favorite here in Sydney, they're about to open their third, but it's Rough and Bare. And they have a wonderful philosophy in how they cook with food, where they're sourcing with food, and you walk in and they have blackboards educating you on why they choose what they choose, why they cook with what they cook. And there's a beautiful balance between, educating you so that you understand why they have available what they do and why the everyday isn't available to you.
Right. That's important.
It is.
Because people are pretty, they're pretty just totally dialed out. There's a lot of massive misconceptions about food. One of the chief ones that I run into over and over and over again with athletes is and people in general, they think food is just energy like gasoline, and they shop for cheap food like they shop for cheap gasoline, and they have no concept of the difference between energy and energy coupled with information, which we call nutrition. So they just think, oh, I can eat this bag of chips and that'll hold me over. And then I can eat this donut or this hot dog off the vendor or this microwaved, burrito or whatever it is. And they don't realize really what's going on and why they're having all these chronic ailments and allergies and illnesses and fatigue until they meet somebody that has enough holistic knowledge to start dialing them in. And one of the points that you were talking about earlier, I wanted to expand on a bit. You talked about how when you were more unhealthy, that McDonald's tasted good to you. Well, 100 years ago, Steiner spoke about in his lectures about a concept he called supersaturation. And what he described way back then was that when people eat processed foods or eat anything strong too much, like sugar or alcohol, or anything that has a drug-like effect. And many people don't realize, by definition, a drug is anything that modulates the function of a cell. So food actually has drug-like effects on you. And he showed that when people eat things that are outside of the range of the normal food we would eat off the farm or out in nature, that the more they stimulate the system, the more the system upregulates itself to that level of expectation, and it becomes, it resets our taste mechanism. It resets blood sugar levels and insulin levels and all the physiological regulators, and then they become entrained. And then all of a sudden, if they don't have something that's soaked in sugar, it just tastes like nothing to them. And he warned that you can take that process to the point where you are basically mainlining alcohol, sugar, and stimulants, and anything else just feels like nothing to you, but you don't realize that you're completely burning out your biological systems. And I think that's one of the problems that we have today is that, as you know, food manufacturers use a lot of chemical trickery, and you find sugar in everything. I mean, I tell people, if you want to see how they use sugar as a drug to bait you to buy their food, just walk through the meat department of almost any grocery store and try to find one package of meat that doesn't have some OSE or sugar inside of it, from bacon to sandwich meats to even, I was out shopping for, it was one of the rare times I was shopping for something. I think maybe Penny asked me to pick up some food, but I was at our local health food store, Jimbo's, and I was looking for ground sausage meat. There's a certain organic ground sausage chicken that Penny can make into patties, like sausage patties. And I wasn't sure which one it was because I had like 6 or 8 different versions. And I'm picking up every one of them, and there was sugar. I'm like, this just looks like straight ground meat, and they've got bloody sugar in this shit. It was pissing me off. So then I ended up getting a hold of Penny, or talking to Penny. She said, oh, no, you've got to go talk to the chef or the butcher to get that particular one. And I was just so irritated because, sugar, as you know, is a highly, highly addictive drug, and they put it everywhere just to maintain that level of supersaturation for people. So I wanted to jump into your book a little bit here. In chapter 1, the top 16 mistakes people make when trying to get healthy, which I thought that's an excellent section. You start off by addressing the belief that sourcing or preparing nutritious meals is too expensive, too hard, takes too long, or is too complicated, and that you need to know how to cook before you can put something healthy together. I really do believe that is a big misconception. Can you elaborate a bit on that one for us?
Yeah, because it's all of those things were really the challenges that my clients were constantly coming to me with, or the, the excuses really, too expensive, too hard, don't have time, I'm not skilled enough, and I think that in each moment we have a choice. We have free will to choose, and that's either what is in alignment to your values and your priorities or not. That's whether we're conscious to what we're choosing or not, moment to moment. They are either reflecting your values and what's important to you. And I think that I often share with my clients that somehow, evidence, and life is evidence of it, but somehow we always find enough time, money, energy, resources for what matters the most to us in life. And we run out of time, energy, money, and resources for what matters the least to us. So, with that principle in mind, I think the list of excuses people come up with are often equal to the lack of value or priority they place on themselves and their health. And that's even when they say they value themselves and their health. The truth is your choices don't lie. Your life demonstrates your core values and your priorities. Yeah. And I think that excuses are a great opportunity to explore the self-limiting ideas and beliefs, and to explore some deeper fears related around, taking responsibility for ourselves and our health and our choices and what they create. Most people are attached to, an ego's needs and wants and desires. And what makes me laugh paradoxically is that these attachments come at the cost of taking care of yourself. And yet the ego itself is all about the I. So
it is a paradox, isn't it?
It is, but I think, and I know that they, what I've said can be hard hitting sometimes. People don't like to hear the truth in that way, because on one hand, they've come to me because they want to get healthier. So, they're demonstrating a value right there, but then their choices aren't demonstrating an alignment to that value. And so to hear someone say to you, well, the truth is your life demonstrates what's important to you, because, your choices don't lie, and what you're creating and manifesting for you is a reflection of your choices. And, that can be hard hitting, but it can also be the wake up call that some people need in terms of realizing that all of these excuses, too expensive, too hard, don't know enough, really are the self-limiting beliefs. And I think a lot of times the fear around taking responsibility for our health, because what happens when we get healthier? We have more creative energy, and then we've got to take responsibility for what we're going to create with it. And the truth is, I don't think people have a big enough why to ground themselves in knowing what to do with that creative force if they liberated it through good eating.
Well, I agree with all the things you said. And, my research into why people choose what they choose and do what they do. And as you know, from working with countless clients, most people don't have any clear conception of their values. They're kind of understated or hidden. And it boils down to two interesting things. Rudolf Steiner said to his anthroposophic physicians in his teaching lectures, he said, whenever you're working with somebody that has a disease, the most important thing to guide them to is to becoming conscious about the secret story that they're telling themselves. He said, once you can get a person to become conscious of the secret story they keep telling themselves, it will usually point to exactly what the formative forces that led to their disease are. And when it comes to values, our values always point to something that ultimately creates meaning for us. And so when people are eating and living in ways that don't produce health, usually they don't realize that the choices they're making ultimately are an expression of what makes meaning for them, but it's unconscious. So if, for example, what makes meaning for them is that I can save money on food so that I can buy a nicer car, then what makes meaning for them is a status symbol. So you have sick people driving fancy cars, not that we have much of that going on. So it really, at the end of the day, and I think it's an important message, is for everybody that's making excuses about why they don't have the time or the money to do the things that ultimately produce health for themselves. What makes meaning for you, and what is the secret story you keep telling yourself that keeps you repeating the behaviors that are not ultimately taking you where you want to go? So that said, I'm sure you're well aware, we're designed to eat by nature organic foods. I mean, the concept of organic didn't really come about till about 1946 when Lady Eve Balfour in England pretty much single-handedly created the whole organic movement. She was really, to my knowledge, the first pioneer, and a couple of other people that partnered with her to start her big farm and all the research that she did, which is in The Living Soil and the Holly Experiment by Lady Eve Balfour, which I'm sure you've probably read that, but it's a fantastic read for those of you that want to really get a good look at all sorts of initial research on food and food studies on animals. But even today, after people like myself and Michael Pollan and organizations like the British Soil Association and many others have been informing the public on the truth of food, and many are still confused and misinformed on the subject, meaning that, now on Gaia and, countless numbers of books and people that are very famous like Michael Pollan, and I've been on the road lecturing on these things since, I started the CHEK Institute in 1995. So, that's been a long time now. And I've done literally thousands of lectures all over the world and consulted for many of the greatest sports teams and Olympic committees and universities and corporations all over the world. And it's just slowly now coming on. Only current stats say that only about 92 to 94%, 4 to 6% of all the food eaten in the world is organic. The rest of it's commercial. So one of the big misconceptions is that organic food is too expensive for people. I'm wondering if you can share your thoughts on this issue, and how do you address that in your book, Rocket Fuel on a Budget?
Yeah, look, it is a big issue. And quite a roadblock to overcome with clients for all the reasons that you've mentioned so far. I think that there are a few things to consider. One is, if you're going to do in my opinion, if you're going to do a price comparison on organic and non-organic, it really needs to be on fresh produce. Because the majority of so-called foods, which in my opinion, if they become processed and packaged, they're not really foods. But the majority of foods that really hurt your wallet are the processed and packaged foods. And, as we know, there's plenty of organic certified packaged foods these days. And so you really, I'll give you an example. Just the other day, I went into our organic whole food Taste Organics to buy some celery, and it was $8.99 for a bunch, which is fairly expensive right now. And then I went just to, out of curiosity, compare our local little IGA convenience store. Popped in there on the way home, and they were $10.99 a bunch, processed, as in commercially non-organic.
Yeah, wow.
So, I think that people have to believe it to see it, which is why when I'm working with clients, I'll often do an experiment with them, and that is, I'll tell them to go shopping to their local grocery store and shop for, their family of 4, which is, invariably the average. If it's a family of 4, 2 kids, and I will do the same. And I'll often say, look, let's just base it on breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 4 days. I'm going to go and purchase what is going to be required for those 3 meals over 4 days organically, and I want you to do the same commercially. And we're going to compare prices. And more often than not, I still come in cheaper. And I'll tell you why. Because the education around, what families, parents, mothers in particular, are purchasing, their trolleys are filled more with the processed packaged foods than they are the fresh produce. And so, when we get back to the house and I pull out what I've bought that is certified organic and organic wherever possible versus what they've bought at the local supermarket, and I've come out at either equal price or just under, but there's no processed packaged food in what I've purchased.
Right.
So, the processed packaged foods, the convenience foods that they tend to bulk up with are what is really where a lot of their money is going, where a lot of their budget is going. And so just some education around, again, and it comes back to having the time, having the know-how, and choosing to invest in the time in the kitchen to produce food that you don't need to rely on packaged and processed foods, for convenience. And you save a lot of money right there. So I think, that's definitely one of the issues. I always bring up again when I'm working with my clients for them to understand the concept between what might appear to be more expensive, even though I can often prove practically through these examples I'm giving you that it's really on par and in some cases less than. One of the other things I discuss with them is, how much money are you spending on medication and on, prescription medication for the symptoms that we're trying to reverse and overcome? How much money are you paying on supplements? How much does it cost you for your doctor's appointment? And, if we redirected all of that money into quality food that is going to support the system to come into harmony and balance and in most cases reverse all of those symptoms, that's money going where it in my opinion, money well spent.
Yes, it's money invested into life itself, not only your life, but the life of the planet. And it's what you described about doing the comparison and the people buying a lot of packaged foods. My observation is that people buy all that, parents buy a lot of that because it gives them the conception that they have more freedom to not to have to cook. And a lot of this stuff ends up being snack foods that are eaten either between meals, but oftentimes it's what people end up eating as a meal. They have crackers and cheap cheese or things like that. But at the end of the day, what they don't realize is that, and I teach athletes this and people all the time, if you were to just get rid of the packaged stuff and keep some high quality jerky meats or some sardines or celery or carrots or just raw vegetables and maybe some things like hummus and a variety of other things that are very easy, very quick. And I've taught many people just carrying like carrots, take 2 carrots, a good apple, and a few sticks of jerky with you that's clean, good quality jerky. And if you get stuck where you don't have time for lunch, you're eating real food that doesn't throw your blood sugar off, that has high levels of nutrition, that's raw, that has vitality. And meanwhile, their previous self, instead of eating that, was eating enzyme-depleted, dead, pasteurized, cooked stuff. And even the organic stuff is loaded with all sorts of sugars, and so it's setting them up for all sorts of problems. But when people realize that you can actually do much better and you don't have to cook and you can have really nutritious snacks and that making a real meal isn't that hard, then when they start practicing that, it's as though, well, their life changes. You've seen it. I've seen it. It's what we do for a living. But they come back wide-eyed and bushy-tailed going, oh my God, I had no idea. Like people start losing 15, 20 pounds in a month, and they may not be doing any more exercising. It's just they've reduced the inflammation so much in their body that they don't have to hold on to gallons of water to try to turn the heat down. So,
and Paul, one of the key things that you're sharing there as well is that people have this misconception that the greatest asset to them is time, and of course it's not. It's energy.
yes,
we can't manufacture any more than 24 hours in a day. It's a finite commodity.
yes.
But our energy, which is at the core of what we actually get done in any given time period, comes down to how much energy, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, creatively, that we can give to any time period. And so whilst people are trying to carve out an extra 5 minutes here, an extra 10 minutes there, they're still not productive because they don't have the energy to be productive, whether they carve out another half an hour, another hour or not. They're sitting there more often than not, cognitively incapable of giving the focus they need to completing a project or to bring the creative inspiration they need to a project, because they don't have the energy within their biological system to support that. So it's understanding, in my opinion, that energy is your greatest commodity, not time.
It is, and one of the other factors is that there's energy, like sugar's energy, but there's also life force energy. And when you're eating raw food or an apple or high quality jerky, jerky's dried in the sun, it's not cooked, so it's a real high quality food if it's properly done. What's happening is you're liberating the energy that is naturally inherent in the food itself, but the body has to go through the process of digestion, metabolism, assimilation, and elimination. And as I show in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, it takes about 55% of the calories we eat just to run a food through the process of breaking it down and liberating the energy so we can use it. So just to take a food from mouth to anus costs about 55% of the energy and calories or resources in the food. But if a person's eating foods that don't have nutrition that is in parallel with the level of energy in it, then they actually have to extract energy and nutrition out of their own body to digest, metabolize, assimilate, and eliminate the food. And this is one of the reasons so many people that are living this way are spending, $35, $40, $50 a month at Starbucks, constantly drinking tea. And this is, in my observation, one of the big drives behind the whole biohacking movement. People are spending tons of money on gadgets and pills to try to take shortcuts that if they would just simply eat the way a human body was designed to eat and put some time and energy into having a relationship with their body, and instead of drugging all the pimples and pills for this and constipation, just say, wow, okay, I've got pimples. Something I'm eating is getting rejected by my body and pushed out of my skin. So what have I eaten lately? Oh, I'm constipated. When's the last time I drank half my body weight in ounces of water, or even the standard kind of general prescription of 8 cups of water a day? Oh, geez, I haven't drank any water at all. So once they start coming into awareness that not only are they not saving money, they're trying to capture energy where there is not enough nutrition to support the metabolic machinery that has got to be in place to liberate the energy as life force. And a person that doesn't bring in adequate amounts of nutrition with energy has no choice but to deplete their own enzymes, their own vitamins, minerals, trace minerals, cofactors. And the next thing you know, they've got all sorts of problems with, this runny nose, this flu, this cold. Then, of course, they're being told to vaccinate, which just poisons the body even more. But, these are real things that I think people need to be aware of. In your book, in the same section, the top 16 mistakes people make when trying to get healthy, number 8 deals with the foods being labeled as natural or organic. The term natural in marketing, because I've read marketing books on this, and I used to subscribe to the food processing industry journal. But the marketing researchers that have looked at this term natural say it's called an empty signifier. And basically, it's a term that they use to trick mostly mothers into believing that because it's natural, it must be good for you. And as we both know, there's a lot of poisonous things that are natural. And when it comes to reading labels, I'm wondering if you could share with us what are some of the common things to look for, and what are the things that may make us want to look deeper into what's in a food before we eat it, since the labeling laws now allowed such a huge amount of information to be left off the label, more trickery backed by science and corporate silliness.
Look, yeah, absolutely. The labeling, I think, you need to take a degree out just to read a label these days.
You do.
If you don't have a background in chemistry or of sorts, then you can be left really, dumbfounded as to really what you're consuming. But I think that anything that, first of all, let's just address organic. We know that unfortunately, organic is just plagiarized these days. Certified organic sugar, sugar is sugar.
Yeah.
And just because it's certified organic, we assume that that's the golden standard and that's healthy for us. So, of course, again, it points back to education and just what we take for granted versus what I feel you've always taught us. You've taught us how to think.
Yes.
And
a novel concept.
It's a novel concept, right? And so, if we applied that concept to reading a label rather than just assuming that if something says organic, it must be healthy because that's what I've been told, there's no thinking process behind that. That's just the brainwashing at work at its best. So, the major areas I bring clients to is anything that is labeled as a natural flavors or natural flavor or natural flavoring is a huge indication. What I've researched behind all of these natural flavorings is a chemical composition that contains MSG, which is a massive antagonist to the body. Citric acid is another component on a label that I stay well clear of. It wreaks havoc with the immune system, with the intestinal tract, the stomach lining, and absolutely negates any benefits from the supplement itself. I mean, it's citric acid. It's not derived from citrus. It's a toxic chemical derived from corn and manipulated into a preservative.
Yeah, it's a preservative.
Yeah, so it's again, really understanding what might sound natural on a label, but is really a chemical experiment. And any preservative, a preservative is to what? Preserve something that is devoid now of its own life force. It's to give it longer shelf life, or it's to stabilize it, or it is to enhance the texture or flavor to it. So none of these things are natural, and they're very chemically based produced.
Yes.
Another thing that I'm very wary of these days is fish oil, and where people derive their omega-3 from. With the state of our fishing industry and the lack of wild fish available, and even these days, if there is wild fish available, I still question the waters with which they are swimming wild in. Unfortunately, our waterways of toxicity, they're filtrating into all areas.
Yes.
And I advise clients to derive a good quality omega-3 these days from more of a plant-based source than a fish-based source for those reasons, unless they can absolutely, guarantee they've done their research and they can guarantee that the source of fish that they're using and how it is processed for its omega-3s is done, is done really well. So, I mean, things like an algae oil or an inchi and what was called an Inca Inchi oil is something that I would use to replace as an omega-3 supplement. And then over here in Australia, I don't know if you've heard of a wonderful practitioner called Cindy O'Meara. She did a documentary, What's with Wheat, and she has a company called Changing Habits, and she's just updated her edition of her book, Changing Habits, Changing Lives, and I use that as a resource for decoding what appears to be safe and legitimate on the surface, but is really a chemical minefield that we're really the lab rats for. And I use that resource with myself and with clients because again, it's just, it's layman's terms. It's taking what's complicated and often we can't even pronounce on a label to breaking it down and really making it clear as to what we need to stay away from, what's safe, what's not. And it's a great resource that I refer clients to. Another really important and very useful resource that I found a few years ago is sugarscience.org. And it's actually a independent website that's been put together by independent scientists, non-funded, no bias. They've put it together themselves to really create an independent, reliable source, which gives you great insight as to how sugar is hidden on labels. And I think there's something like over 61 different words currently used to describe sugar on labels.
To disguise it.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the things that I tell people as a general rule, almost always the more ingredients there are on the label, the more likely it is that it's not good for you. And if you can't, as we already discussed, I say if you can't pronounce the word on the label, it's probably a chemical that's going to irritate your body in some way or another. But at the end of the day, if a person just takes the time to look at what's in something and look for something that's got minimal additives and preservatives and colorings and stabilizers, they can probably do okay as long as they're getting enough raw food and organic produce and eating as much free range and meats and wild caught fishes and things from high quality sources. And I think one of the big things is if people would spend some time looking into where the farmers' markets are, and instead of going to supermarkets, the average tomato has flown 1,500 miles or gone by sea or air 1,500 miles before it gets to your plate. So if we start looking for the local farmers, many of which farm organically, but just don't pay the money for certifications, people can not only save a lot of money, but they can find that they can get a lot of really high quality food and feel a lot better at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, another way, again, on the topic of saving money, a few years ago, we used to get together with another family and we used to purchase a whole lamb, and it was like $200 a family.
Yes.
Directly from the farmer. It's beautiful biodynamic lamb, and it would the farmer would take it for the price, so $400 for two families, $200 each, and we would split that, and they would take it, they would slaughter it, and they would butcher the lamb into all of the cuts that we asked for. So exactly, if we wanted sausages, if we wanted, whatever the derivative of the cuts that we wanted. And, you can go to a butcher and easily spend $150, $170 on, half a dozen different cuts of meat.
Absolutely.
That's going to last you a week.
Right.
And yet, for $200, and you've got yourself half a lamb that is, you can have it whatever you want, parts minced, chopped, sausages, and we saved so much money that way. and I'm about to actually start doing the same thing with a company that we use up in Byron for our cooking school up there. We're about to start to do the same thing with another family. Probably there's going to be 3 families that will buy in bulk and have it shipped down and put in the freezer. And when you look at what you would be saving over the course of, your individual purchases, it's substantial.
It is very substantial. And the difference in the quality is mind-blowing. I mean, I've turned a number of people onto these types of situations, and they're sitting there eating steak or lamb chops or bacon, and it's just like the flavor and the depth and the nutrition. You literally feel your vitality rising up with every bite you put in your mouth. It's like you're being plugged into, a turbocharger. And many people in cities, they say, we don't have that here. I live in Manhattan, or I live in, yeah, well, good. You could say that right to your deathbed. But the reality of it is, if most people, if they could afford to, if they would just search for certified organic butchers, most cities, even small cities I've been to, there's a certified organic butcher, or they have certified organic meats available. But again, just going to the local farmers or going to the local farmers association, which most people can find if they just contact the Chamber of Commerce in their city and say, is there a farming association? Then you contact the farming association. Is there an organic farming association or a directory of organic farmers? I remember one time I had a medical doctor from the Mayo Clinic taking training with me. And he was in HLC class, and he said to me in class, he said, Paul, there's no way I can eat this way. There's no organic food anywhere near where I live in Rochester, Minnesota. I said, have you looked? He said, I've never seen one the whole time. I've been there for like 10 or 12 years. And I said, do a Google search for organic farms, Rochester, Minnesota. Well, he didn't do it till he got home, but I'll never forget the Monday morning that he got home, I got an email, and his first words were like, oh my God, you're not going to believe it. I found 6 organic farms, none of which was any more than a 2 or 3 mile drive from my house. They've all been there all these years, and I didn't even know it. So a lot of people convince themselves that things aren't available, but they don't actually put any effort into looking. And at the end of the day, when you realize how powerful food is, either as a source of health or a source of disease, even if you have to save money to buy a half of an animal and have it shipped to you frozen and freeze it, it's still a really good savings in the long run.
It really is. Absolutely. No, I completely agree. That is something that, I have managed over the years, certain clients that, are willing just to put a little bit of extra effort up front for long-term better results. And it shows, it shows because their health, their vitality improves. And as we keep saying, you can have all the money in the world being spent outwardly for, short-term gratifications, but if you don't have the health to enjoy it, what's the point?
Yeah, you've got nothing. Yeah, when you're spending your money because you feel shitty all the time, well, you just feel shitty all the time. And life is not so fun. I'm quite confident you've seen shows and documentaries, because you've already mentioned Jamie Oliver and you've mentioned Pete Evans. And so, Jamie Oliver strikes me before these shows showing how terrible children are being fed in school lunch programs, eating predominantly packaged, canned, processed foods. And I've also seen a number of such programs showing that a lot of these schools, from elementary school to junior high school to high school, and even universities, are almost constantly using microwave ovens. And many of the places I've been to, the cafeterias have all sorts of stuff you can buy, like a burrito or a hamburger that's wrapped up in plastic, and you can go microwave it. You see the microwave ovens just going nonstop. So I'm wondering, as a chef, as a holistic lifestyle coach, and someone who has a lot of skills in these areas, if you have a message for parents with children that are in school in this regard, what would it be? And before you answer the question, I want to highlight the fact that you have mothering experience. In your last partnership, you guys had, what, 2 kids?
Yeah, we still do.
Oh, okay.
I didn't same partnership, and I've been a stepmom for the last 10 years.
Right. So you're answering this from legitimate experience. Jo's not just talking out the side of her head as a woman with no experience as a mother. So when parents are sending their kids off to school to eat there, knowing what's going on, if you have a message for those parents, what is it?
Well, something that my partner has taught me over the years is to choose your battles wisely. And I think that, a battle that I chose within this relationship was to enforce healthy eating choices, habits, and behaviors. It's a battle worth fighting for. And, as an example of that, when I first stepped into the relationship, processed cereals and things like this was a staple. And I would say, over the 10 years, for the past 8 of those years, there hasn't been boxed cereal in the house. And, yes, there was a weaning off process, but that was quite simple. It was there became no boxed cereal visible or available, and it was a treat on a holiday, half term on holidays, until they had become so weaned off it that they didn't wish for it because they had such a comparison in how they felt when they did have it to what their alternative choices were. And it became clear to them. What I really want to share with parents is that, and I think that we can probably even remember for ourselves, I was brought up, my mum was a wonderful cook. Things were always homemade. We had very, very little processed foods and packaged foods. Everything was always cooked from scratch. And I think that it's a natural process of teenagehood and adolescence, and you do rebel. You leave home and you rebel and you drink too much and you go off and eat rubbish. But the foundations that at a cellular level, I think that there's cellular memory that occurs when you have been given the foundations as a child. And you come back. Eventually you do full circle and you come back. If you've had those as a firm grounding, then, any parent can be proud of the fact that, yes, you can expect your child to, go off the rails, etc. But in my experience, 9 times out of 10, they hit their mid to late 20s and they start to realize that there's nothing that beats home cooking. There's nothing that beats, quality food. And they do come back to it. So,
especially athletes.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They can't stay at the top of the game without it.
Yes.
And they find that out either the hard way or, by doing what's natural in the first place. I think that, another message that I really want to give to parents with children in school is taking the time to create packed lunches with them from a young age. Get them involved in the choice process. Get them involved in making it fun. And I think that if you can get into the habit of your kids taking their own school lunch, then of course straight away you eliminate the microwave foods, you eliminate the canteen choices, etc. And that's not to say that, occasionally they're not going to swap their foods with a friend. I hear that all the time. It's like swapping comics, that they do it with their food. And I just think, though, that taking the time to educate and provide packed lunches and get them involved in the process. I've run a number of workshops with a girlfriend over here on school lunches, back to school lunches, and just educating mums on what to put in them, how to involve the child. And it makes a big difference. Yes, it is. Parenting is hard work. Okay, let's not mince our words around it. If Paul, I look back and I think to myself how much time, energy my parents put into parenting us. They were all, just the constant education on, how to speak well, and, constantly pulling you up when you said a sentence incorrectly, or constantly pulling you up, if you haven't tidied your room, or, it takes energy and effort and discipline to be a parent these days. And unfortunately, most parents are so distracted by other lifestyle stresses that they don't have the time, energy, and resources to put into parenting.
Well, they have it. They just don't create it. They don't.
Yeah.
They don't make it. They don't make it a priority. It's because, unfortunately, most parents they don't realize, one, that the mistakes they make in parenting will be there at their doorstep asking for help for the rest of their lives. And two, parenting ultimately produces the future of the entire planet. So if people have more orientation toward how much money can I make, and when can I get my new car and my boob job or my next set of golf clubs, then they end up spending all sorts of money that's not really adding value to the lives of the family, or to the food of the family, or to supporting the kids in their own development. And we end up with what we've got now, a sea of children worldwide with the highest rates of chronic disease, illness of all types, drug use of all types, medical drug use of all types, addictions, and the highest rates of suicides that we've ever had. And these are the people that will be running the country when the rest of us are too old to do anything about it. And they'll be doing it with grammar that is unreadable on iPhones, in text messages, and will never have a relationship with each other or the world, which really, in plain English, will be more of a disaster than most people take the time to actually imagine. So at the end of the day, parenting turns out to be God's work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we know there's research out there to show that first time in the, race of humankind that we are looking at children not outliving their parents.
It's crazy. Years ago, and I'm sharing the story, we have talked about this a little bit, but I want to show just how silly this whole organic food is expensive can get. As you know, I've worked for a long, long string of elite and professional athletes. And one day I had a professional hockey player come to me because he was having some chronic structural problems, pain, and performance deficits. And through word of mouth or articles that I'd written, he heard about me, and he pulled in a brand new Porsche, I forgot what they call it, the Quattro 4-wheel drive twin turbo. It's a $150,000 sports car. And so I'm counseling this guy after I did his evaluation and looking at his diet, which is just chips and soda pop and burgers and crap. And of course, he's got lots of inflammation in his body. And I said to him, you really need to switch to 100% organic diet. And he stopped and just looked right at me and said, are you kidding me? That's too expensive. I can't afford that. And I said, you just pulled into my driveway in a $150,000 car. You've already told me that you have 4 houses. You've got multiple girlfriends that you've got credit cards for. So you're telling me that you can't afford organic food? And he said, yes. And you've just described why. I said, you have a serious problem with your values. And if you don't get clear on what I'm telling you and why you're here in the first place, you're going to lose your job because, as you well know, professional sports isn't a game of excuses. You either perform at the high level or the first guy that can replace you will replace you. And you'll get traded once or twice. If you're lucky, then you'll be out of the game. And how are you going to compensate for the $4 million a year you used to make when you've developed a lifestyle like that? So I had to go through with him and look at all the ways he was spending money. And it was just a long laundry list, mostly just, stuff that has no value or meaning. It's just really just, typical 25-year-old, look how cool I am. I've got this car. I've got this house. I've got this boat. I've got these multiple jet skis. I have houses all over the world, but I'm broken down and sick, and now I can't afford organic food. So if you have anything to add to that in your experience, what are people spending money on that stops them from having the money to eat well? And we've already discussed the cost of that mindset. So what are some of the things that you see people spending money on that, if they were really paying attention or are listening to this podcast, could realize that money would be far better spent on food? We've already talked about medical drugs for one.
Paul, I see it, I'll summarize it in terms of whatever it is that's creating short-term gratification for people. That's where I see people spending their money.
Yes.
Whatever the next dopamine hit is where they're going to spend their money. They invest in ideas and illusions that, what they're seeking is outside of themselves. And so they spend a lot of money on the illusion before they wake up from the dream. And
in a nightmare. They wake up from their dream in a nightmare.
That's right. And sometimes, the polarity has got to be at its equal opposite for it to be enough, big enough awakening. I don't see, anything materialistic, whether it's an experience or a device or, whatever it is to keep up with the Joneses or provide the ego with feeling like it's, maintaining its point of, its center point of gravity, whatever its idea is that it needs in order to feel safe and valued and accepted and approved of and appreciated and acknowledged in the world. That's where I see money spent.
Well, it's a great answer, and I'm going to share something very interesting. A Jungian analyst and a man who founded a system called process psychology, who's a very, very intelligent man named Arnold Mindell, says in one of his books, a culture is a bunch of people doing the same things. But when we're in a culture, and the same things is diseases and depression and anxiety and skin problems and back problems and neck problems and digestive problems and chronic inflammatory syndromes and irritable bowel syndrome and food allergies coming out the yazoo and knee replacements at 55 years old and shoulder replacements and hip replacements and a long, long laundry list of this kind of stuff. I think it's really important for all of us to realize that those are the results of the choices and those are the results of the things that we're spending our money on. And when we're spending the money that we're spending that produces that result, the mere image of that is that's exactly what we're doing to Mother Nature. Mother Nature is now sick. She's arthritic. She's got digestive problems. She can't breathe. Her immune system is kicking in and going from hot to cold to try to pump the system. And so the deeper message in our podcast is that this isn't really just an issue of personal health. It's an issue of social, cultural, and world health. And it starts at the breakfast table in the house. This is serious, serious stuff.
Paul, absolutely. What you've just said is the recognition that, part of the one, part of the whole. We're not separate. We're not separate from nature. We are nature. And so what we do to ourselves, we're doing to her. And, we're at a pivotal point. I was just listening to, a beautiful dissertation with Eckhart Tolle the other day, and the book that he wrote, The New Earth, and the critical point that we are at. And it starts with the individual. It starts with the individual, just taking on board all the points that we've spoken about today.
Yes, it's true. Now, let's just agree that there are some people out there, a lot of them actually. I think years ago I did research on personal trainers and found that the average personal trainer at that time was only making about $23,000 a year. And I was doing this research because I was telling Penny, most of the people coming to the CHEK Institute programs are personal trainers, and they're undereducated for the level that I teach at, and they don't make enough money to really afford my courses. So there's most people go into a gym and think personal trainers are doing pretty good, but the average personal trainer's lifespan, according to a buddy of mine who ran a big division of 24-hour fitness, said the average personal trainer is only in the business for 7 months, and then they can't survive any longer. And then you've got, the service people. You've got people that clean homes and watch parking lots and drive taxi cabs, which may or may not make a decent amount of money. And there's people that are just strapped because they've got money tied up in stock markets or homes or whatever. So they've invested in what they think is going to produce long-term safety and security financially. But regardless of the situation or the excuses, let's just agree there are some people that, even though we're saying it's a game you're playing, but there are people right now that could use some good advice as to, if you've got to limit what you can buy as organic food, what should you invest in first? So what do you tell people when there is a legitimate situation where they can't afford, or they have a situation where, maybe they've justified in their head that they can't afford, but if you can get them started in the right direction, what would you say should be the change in your diet first? If you're only going to buy 25% of your diet or half of your diet as organic food, where do you think the money should be invested first?
So there's a few things I'd address there. I think that always trying to buy the best of what you consume the most of.
That's a great tip.
And if listeners know anything of your primal pattern type, then your primal diet pattern type, then understanding that if you know what your type is, then you're going to have a slightly higher ratio of either fats and proteins or quality fruits, plant-based foods, and making your investment based on what your ratio, your highest ratio is. That's the first place I would start. I think there's some great resources out there. I think finding out where you can, at farmers markets, we've already spoken about how there are plenty of farmers doing the right thing, farming the land, pesticide-free, chemical-free, but not paying for the certification. And so there's plenty of farmers you can be supporting and buying their healthy organic produce, but not at the certified organic prices. So I'd be sourcing that out. I think that Environmental Workers Group put out a really good list of what's called the Clean 15, the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. And that if you are on a budget around fruits and vegetables, then it's staying away from the ones that are listed the Dirty Dozen. And if you're budgeting, then pick from the Clean 15, from the commercially grown Clean 15. It's going to have less pesticide residue on the skins and through the food itself. That's another way that you could look at where and how you're spending your money. So I think just those three, without overwhelming people, just those three. Start with whatever you buy the most of, buy the best of what you consume the most of, and then look for the pesticide, hormone-free, non-organic products or non-certified organic products, and then have a look at the Environmental Workers Group. I'd go with those top three first.
Yes, and since you mentioned my primal pattern system, if those of you listening have not read my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, I do have a test questionnaire you can run on there. It does help you identify your primal pattern diet and then gives you tips for fine tuning. But if you want to go much deeper, I have an online program at CHEKinstitute.com called Primal Pattern Eating, or Eating for Your Primal Pattern Type. I can't remember exactly the name, but you can search in the search function on the webpage if you want to find it. That's training that comes right out of HLC2. So if you're wondering what you'd learn in Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 2, the first level of our professional training, I teach you 3 techniques in there that you can use to fine-tune your diet. One of the things that I share, Joe, in my You Are What You Eat audio program with workbook is that if you have to really scrimp on food and you can only limit what you can buy organic, I tell people you're far better off to get organic free-range meats and wild-caught fish and then use a high-quality natural vegetable cleaner such as vinegar and water or cider vinegar and water. And they have some good now organic sprays that you can keep under the sink just to clean your food, and skin the produce, because animals, as you know, bioaccumulate. So on average, I found a research paper showing it takes about 6 pounds of vegetable matter for a pound of flesh in an animal like a cow. So when you're eating a piece of beef, that cow had to eat a lot of grass, which could be very, very toxic grass. And most of the commercial animals, as you know, are fed all sorts of wild and crazy shit, from sawdust to engine oil to plastic chips to dead animal parts. I mean, the stuff when I researched what the government allowed commercial farmers to feed animals, it just shocked the hell out of me. So by spending your money on organic flesh and really doing a good job of choosing the best produce you can get, either from farmers markets, local farmers, or the best that you can get, and then giving it a good wash and peeling the skins. And the other thing is, if you buy an apple, let's say, and you peel it, but you don't wash it first, which a lot of people do, they don't realize that the pesticides are in oil-based carriers, so the rain doesn't wash them off. So what you've just done is you've gotten pesticides all over your hands, and now you're handling your skinned apple with pesticides. So I tell people, wash the fruit after you wash your hands, and then skin it and eat it or prepare it. And I also tell people, if you're going to eat commercially raised animals or fish, and a lot of the farm fish is as toxic as anything that's coming from commercial farms, and there's almost no regulations on the drugs and chemicals they can give farm fish, I tell them, put a drip pan underneath it, cook it on a grill rack so that the fat drips out of the flesh, and you don't eat that fat, because the toxins that the animal has stored are bioaccumulated in the fat to protect the glands, organs, and nervous system, which all animals do. So just adding to the points that you shared, I think those are a couple of important tips. My next issue I wanted to explore with you is, what are your opinions on water, such as how does the quality of water impact the way food responds to cooking and preparation? If people are cooking with poor quality water, such as tap water with chlorine in it, how much of the toxins of the water end up being absorbed into the food? And since our bodies are about 70% water in general, what do you suggest people on a budget do to maximize the quality of the water they're consuming via cooking and drinking? Because, I've seen a lot of people will go buy bottled water, but then cook with tap water, because somehow in their mind, they don't realize that's getting into their body. So what are some tips you can share with regard to these issues about water?
Well, it's interesting. Doing a little bit of, over the years, some research around how the contaminants of water, obviously our food that we are cooking our water in, or as you've just explained, washing through preparation, the contaminants within water, our foods are permeable. They're going to take on a percentage of those contaminants. What percentage, I don't know. But what I do know is that, there was a study published back in the Journal of Environmental Health back in 2002 that found that tap water represented about 14 to 20% of the total lead exposure that people were being exposed to through, old lead pipes, etc., in home. And what was interesting within that piece of research was that, from a cooking perspective, that boiling water does not remove the lead, but it actually increases its concentration.
Sure, you're losing water relative to elemental mass, just like if you can boil salt water until you got nothing but salt in the bottom of the pan.
Right. So, when we're looking at the use of tap water from a cooking perspective, then, making sure that we are using filtered water. One of the first things that I did when I did HLC1, at the end of the 3 days, I came home, and the very first 2 action points that I took was to throw out the microwave and purchase a water filter for the tap.
Great.
They're the two physical actions that I took and implemented straight away. What I would say to people, just July last year, in Australia, we had a health warning alert from the Environmental Health Standing Committee on again, lead in tap water. So I highly recommend an investment into a water filter. And the investment it's not going to break the bank. Because we rent where we are, we still have a double carbon filter attached to our tap that we change the filters every 6 to 12 months. I check them and just, have a look at what level they're at and change them accordingly. And they are a double carbon filter that removes the chlorine and the fluoride and all the other nasties. And that's, of course, what I use for any cooking and food preparation. It's always out of the filtered water. And here in Australia, there are, lots of different filtration systems to look into. But to answer your question, it's fundamental. Water, we're a saline solution, 70% water for a reason. It's got to matter, and its quality does matter. So again, making that investment to some sort of filtration on your tap is the first place that I would go.
Another interesting thing, 2 things that you've triggered me to share. First is many people do go out and buy water filters, but they never actually check what the lifespan of the filter is. Most of the filters will tell you this filter will filter approximately 1,000 gallons of water. Some of them have a light on them, depending on how much money you spend. But one of the things that I've seen that's a real issue is when people buy filters and they don't replace the filters when they should, they don't realize that the filter is pulling out all sorts of microorganisms and bacteria and fungal spores and everything you can imagine. And I've seen many people get bad parasite infections because they haven't changed their water filtration system, such as reverse osmosis. Membranes can get very clogged up with organisms that if the filter gets too clogged up, it starts pushing the stuff through the filter, and the filter itself just breaks down and doesn't work anymore. And so you set yourself up for a lot of health problems, all the while thinking you're drinking filtered water. The other thing is nowadays, they're getting pretty elaborate with mobile filters. If you go to like outdoor hiking and camping stores, they've got like water bottles that have filtration systems, and hike for like if you're out hiking, you can just dip your bottle in a stream, and it actually does quite a decent job of filtering it. So if you're out and about and you don't want to spend the money on bottled water, which oftentimes is no better than the water you're drinking, and research shows it takes 3 times the amount of water a bottle holds to manufacture the plastic holding it. So we're we're wasting a lot of water. I try to avoid that unless I have no other choice. Like if I'm traveling on an airplane and you know how they make you dump all your water coming in, so you've got no choice. But a great technique that I've been telling people is just go get one of those portable water bottles with a filtration system in it. And once again, just see what the shelf life is on the filter. Because a lot of those replacement filters are only like $7 to $15. And then at least you have a decent filtration system that you can take anywhere you want. And you're probably getting as good a water by just going to a drinking fountain or the bathroom and filtering that water into your bottle as you would for the bottles you're paying for in plastic anyhow. And since most of these companies are just filtering tap water anyhow, it's not really that much different.
I completely agree, Paul. All really great tips, great tips. And you know, one thing that I found with filters, one of the first indications that a filter needs changing, because as you quite rightly say, you know, they give an indication as how often you should change them, but what contaminants are coming through one area of water supply versus another area of water supply can be completely different.
Yes.
And one of the symptoms of a filter needing to be changed is the flow of water starts to slow down.
Yes, it
does. The moment you see the flow of water start to slow down, it's your first red flag.
You can also, if they get bad enough and you drink the water, there's a smell that comes, I call it a mouth smell. When you're drinking the water, it's a off smell, a stale, almost like food that's been sitting in the refrigerator too long. There's just something off about it. And if people pay attention, and they all of a sudden get that smell, it's like, oh, I better check this. I better replace this filtration system. The other thing I'll point out, even though I wasn't going to go into this, I think it's just a good tip for people. Because I'm a consultant to lots of people that own biodynamic farms and things like that, and I get emails from all over the world, what's the best water filtration system? If you really want to do diligence for a water filtration system, the only way you can do that, like for a home, is to have your water tested and to find out exactly what's in it, because there is a very wide range of heavy metals and chemicals and organic organisms in water. And what one filter that might be great for taking lead out might not be very good for taking many other things out. So until you actually know what's in your water, it's impossible to buy a good filter. You may spend a lot of money on an expensive filter, but it may not be the right filter for what you need, and it may not filter out what you need filtered out. And many, many companies, within 10 seconds on Google in any city, you'll find someone who will test your water, and then you can know exactly what you need for a filtration system. And it could save you a lot of money, because if you know exactly what you need, you might get by with just a Brita filter or a carbon filter, like you said, instead of needing something very elaborate. I've had clients that had very elaborate things that actually were so elaborate that I had to hire consultants to do research to find out if we could get a company to custom make them a filter. But in general, most people are just buying filters based on what some article or ad says, not realizing that filters are very specific to what they filter out. You know, because you're an instructor for me and you know my course material very well, you know how important I always, in our system, 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 1, what is your dream? 2, where are you out of balance with regard to the male and the female? 3, what choices are you willing to make? 4, what are your values to support Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Movement, and Dr. Happiness? So how important do you feel it is for people in general to have a clearly stated dream and supportive values, so that when they're shopping for food, they have a conscious awareness of what they're trying to put nutrition into, i.e. energy and nutrition into the very person that's chosen to live that way, so they can accomplish the building of their new home, or supporting their son in winning a championship in gymnastics or soccer or whatever it is. In your coaching, what do you feel happens that's different when people have a clear dream and values versus those that don't?
Oh, it's life-changing. Life-changing. It's, it's absolutely fundamental. Your 1, 2, 3, 4, the 2, 3, 4 are subordinate to the one. If you don't have a dream, if you don't have a clear vision, dream, or a big enough why, then you've got nowhere to, you can't create values. Your values come out of a well-defined, clear dream. And, this is the problem today is that we're finding that most people's dreams aren't actually their own, which is part and parcel of why they have so many problems committing to following through with the choices that they need to make to support the dream. Because when they really look into it, they realize that the dream, they're trying to support someone else's dream. And through the coaching that we do, thankfully, what you teach us is to help someone really unravel and untangle themselves to know what is authentically their own dream versus the inherited dream of either, an unfulfilled dream of a
society,
family or a parent,
culture,
society,
corporations.
Work, exactly. So, it's everything, Paul. It's foundational. You can't, it is the catalyst for change. So if you don't have a dream, you're going to, people are living their nightmare. And we know that. We see it.
Yeah.
They have to be grounded in something that feels grounded to them in their life, but it has to create meaning and purpose to them. And that's the foundation of a dream.
And a lot of people say to me, oh, I don't know what my dream is. I've been thinking about that forever. I said, well, listen, you got to remember a dream is also a goal or an objective. And I believe it was Brian Tracy who said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And if you don't know why you're exercising or not, eating well or not, well, then if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. There happens to be the price of ignorance and not paying attention. And as you've heard me probably say many times, your yes has no value until you learn to say no. And it is our values that are our own code of when to say yes and when to say no. And because food is so critical for our health, our vitality, our creativity, our sex life, our reproductive capabilities, everything, having values is if you don't have a clear sense of what you want in your life and values to support it, well, then you just become a victim of social programming and you just spend your whole life working to buy cars for doctors and keep drug companies rich, and the list is very, very long. One of the things that's a big issue even today, even after much, much discussion and debate and books like The Whole Soy Story by Kayla Daniel, which is a phenomenal book, there's still a ton of mothers feeding baby formulas made of soy and people on vegetarian and vegan diets eating piles of soy. So I'm wondering if you can share some of your concerns and or tips with regard to soy-based foods, and if there are tips for using soy effectively, could you share them?
So, it's one of the things that I do address in Rocket Fuel on a Budget on page 8 and 9, the truth and myths around soya, which, a lot of that has been taken from the valued information from Weston A. Price Foundation and all the research that's been done through them. I think that soya from a cooking or within food and the consumption, it has its place, but it has its place in far, far smaller amounts than the average person realizes. And of course, the nature in which the soya is made available is so important. So I don't touch anything that is not a fermented and properly fermented, that traditionally would take a minimum of 2 years to properly ferment the soya bean into a product that is bio compatible for the body to actually recognize and break down and assimilate and be able to utilize its byproducts of nutrition. So, a fermented miso or a tamari soy sauce, they, they are certainly products that I do use within cooking, to either within soups or sauces or broths. I add miso too, a fermented miso. And I think, obviously there are a number of health concerns that, I think the general public are becoming more and more educated on in regards to how hormonally disruptive commercial soya is, and how it plays, havoc with our hormonal system, with our digestive system, with the phytic acids that aren't properly neutralized, with the various deficiencies it causes in calcium and vitamin D.
Elevated estrogen levels.
Yep, all of those, hormone mimicking issues that soya produces. And, of course, as you mentioned before, they're being used in infant formulas and such like, which are causing all sorts of growth, developmental and hormonal issues with young babies and children these days. So from a cooking perspective, I like just to keep it very, very simple. That's why the education around, the truth and myths of soya are in the book. And then the advice around the types of soya is really keeping it simple. And my two things there are quality and quantity. The quality has to be properly fermented and traditionally done so. And the quantity needs to be a whole lot less in terms of, I just see commercially, people put soy sauce on every meal that they eat. They just cook up some pasta and they'll just, sprinkle it with soy sauce, and because they're addicted, they're so deficient in their own minerals, they're craving salts, and they're getting it from this salty food, which is causing more problems than it is providing benefits. So the amount that we're using and the quality are the two key factors that I would share there.
The other thing too is a lot of soy sauces have gluten in them. And I think a lot of people are unaware of that. So even if you're going to use even the highest quality soy sauce, if you're gluten intolerant, you got to make damn sure it doesn't have gluten in it, or you might wonder why the hell you've got chronic gas and bowel movement problems and foggy head and all the stuff that goes with that. One of the things you talked about on page 16 and 17 in your book is pantry essentials. Can you share what some essentials are everyone should have if they want to eat healthy on a low budget or otherwise? So let's say that, I'm a college student and I'm a bachelor and I do some cooking for myself, or I'm a single mother, or, the typical person who's busy and maybe is thinking, okay, after listening to this, maybe I will start cooking for myself. What are the essentials that pretty much anyone should have as kind of the base toolkit for healthy eating and cooking?
Look, the very first for me is a really good range. Invest in some really beautiful organic herbs and spices. Commercial herbs and spices are a big minefield of, again, nasties in them that you just don't realize. They're irradiated, they're devoid, they're a dead food, often have the preservatives and various things in it that we were speaking about earlier. And if you are a chef that loves cooking and you're using these things on a daily, regular basis, then these nasties are going to add up pretty quickly to becoming a problem in the system, and you don't even realize it. So I would definitely look at a great range of organic herbs and spices, and then your basics around always having garlic and ginger and turmeric and things like that on hand. Pretty much, if there was a pantry that had some coconut oil in it, some coconut cream or coconut milk, some raw honey, some tamari or miso. You've got your sort of your perishable pantry products such as the onions, potatoes, that sort of thing, and then you've got your non-perishable pantry products like your raw honey and your miso, tamari, etc. I often keep on hand, just, for emergencies, a few tins of quality organic tinned tomatoes, chopped tomatoes. Things like gelatin powder and collagen powder. They are things that, again, I add in for a lot of people who are working with gut issues today, repairing their gut. And they are, supplements that can be a healthy adjunct to things that you need in your pantry, whether you're doing a juice, or a smoothie and you want to add some, collagen powder into it, as well as, obviously the first point of call is always your homemade stocks that you're doing and your broths. But just good quality oils and good quality herbs and spices. And then the absolute basics around the perishable items like your garlic, your fresh ginger, your turmeric, your onions, carrots, potatoes. And then I've always people always laugh, but I've often gone into a home where they've had nothing, pretty much nothing in the fridge, and yet I've been able to make a meal out of just having some good oils, some good herbs and spices, and even if there's only vegetables left in the fridge, I've been able to put something together. And it's very much based on just being able to have some quality staples on hand.
Yeah, and I don't know if butter is considered a pantry food, but for me, I think people could get so much nutrition and good energy just by investing in a supply of good organic butter, because it can handle high heat for cooking. You can spread it on anything you want. As a chef, butter has a very wide range of applications, and it's something that's worth spending money on to get a good, clean, high quality product.
It is. Butter and ghee as well. Ghee is another one that I highly recommend. It's even more heat tolerant than butter is.
Yeah.
With the milk solids removed. Ghee is a beautiful product. I use it in lots of elixirs that I make up, hot elixirs, and in curries, and I just sautéed some potatoes last night for dinner in ghee, and it's just beautiful.
Also, I'll tell you another really good use for an organic ghee is it makes a great sex lube.
Thanks for sharing, Paul.
Well, it's like you are what you eat.
We'll go from the pantry to the bedroom as usual.
Well, for adults, all sorts of things make that journey.
Too true.
Yes. For people that are trying to save money on food, and I'm talking about the typical person that's not aware of what they're doing aware of what they're doing with regard to food, and by no means should we don't want to come across as that we're demeaning anybody. We too all had our own level of ignorance at one time, but for most of us, it was our pain and frustration that we couldn't get help from medical doctors in the medical system that led us into our own exploration that ultimately led us to realizing this is so important. We want to, devote our time and our energy and our life to sharing it with people. But we have massive problems with fungal and parasite infections today. How much of that do you feel is coming from eating packaged and processed foods, like we were talking about, that your clients were putting in their shopping cart thinking they're eating well, just because they're ultimately not realizing that a lot of the foods that they're eating actually facilitate fungal infection and parasite infections? Is that something you've seen out there in your work?
Massively. Parasites, they love cheap processed foods. That's what they feed off. Your analogy that you teach us in HLC1 has always stuck with me, and that is, parasites are Mother Nature's decomposers.
Yeah.
So, they come in and where there is not enough life to sustain the biological system or organism. It's their job to, process, transform it through, and take it back down into the cycle of life, and reconstitute it. And, this is the problem. Most people's biological batteries are fed with nutriently deficient foods that has no life force and sends off the infrared signal that it's not healthy enough to sustain life, and therefore, come on in and, start Mother Nature's very natural organic process of eliminating what does not have the survival mechanism to, and also where there's no life, there's no contribution. And this is the problem that, people are, when they're unhealthy and deficient and sick, they're not making a contribution anymore to life.
No.
And that's as painful for them physically as it is mentally and emotionally. And, this is part of, at a spiritual level, if you wanted to look at a parasite's job at a spiritual level, is, to process that contribution back into the cycle of life again when it can't contribute at a life force level.
Yes. One of the issues I see, having coached countless thousands of people, even people that have a fair bit of money, and it's not because they can't afford it, but they're just unaware. I see so many aluminum and Teflon-coated pots and pans everywhere you go. If you get what do you call it when you rent a house these days? Like a vacation rental. You go on a website, or you get a hotel, like a lot of hotels that'll have like little kitchenettes in them, which we get on the road, but we're forever having to deal with all these Teflon and aluminum pans everywhere. And I've gone into people's houses that are clients, and they've got a $150,000 car, a television screen so big it'll cover half their house, all the toys, but they're eating off of this cheap stuff. How important do you feel it is, even for people on a low budget, to invest in a good frying pan or in a good pan for boiling things or cooking things in? And are there any recommendations you would make as far as the type of pan or pot?
Yes, there is. One of the first things that I want to share there, though, is that, to your point, heavy metals and trace heavy metal toxicity is one of in the top 3 to 4 biggest issues behind so many illnesses today.
Yes.
So how important it is, it's massively important. Up there with, the problems we're still working through with the remnants of DDT and the virus explosions that we've had of late, and the problems with radiation, and that heavy metal toxicity is up there with definitely in the top 3 to 4 problems. So it is, you're cooking every day, you're using a non-stick Teflon or aluminium coated pan, you are exposing yourself on a daily basis to small parts of highly toxic trace metals. So my go-to that I recommend people go and have a little read of, and she's actually updated her 2019 review, is a website called wellnessmama.com. And she does a great job at pulling together the cited research on cooking utensils and what are your definite no-nos, and out of the safer options, which ones are more cost-effective, and which ones are really ticking all the boxes around safeguarding against these heavy metals. So that's a really good resource for people.
That's great.
There are some really good cost-effective stainless steel and cast iron pieces that people can buy. I always have a motto that is, buy cheap, buy twice.
You see a lot of these things for sale even at places like the Goodwill, and people don't realize that's a far better pot than the one in your house, and it's like 99 cents.
Exactly. So look, I think that cooking utensils is a very personal thing. If you're a lover of cooking like I am, then they're as personal to you as your chef knives are.
Yes.
And so the look, the feel, the brand that provides you with the look and the feel that you want is a personal experience. But there is certainly, as I said, that website is a great resource to get your head around what's a definite no-no. It takes all the guesswork out of understanding, even when you're buying stainless steel and there's a ratio between the amount of nickel and aluminium, but in it. She goes into different brands that have the lower percentage of those other components in a stainless steel cookware. So that's I have mainly stainless steel with a couple of cast iron pieces. It's an incredibly important component of cooking and homeware utensils when you're looking after your health.
Yeah, for those of you listening that have the money to invest in some really high quality cookware, what I teach my students through the Holistic Lifestyle Coaching program is to look into Salad Masters cookware. It's not cheap. It's made of high grade surgical steel. They have really neat things like skillets that have oil inside the metal so that it evenly heats the food. But it's super, super high quality stuff. They come to your home, they do a demonstration. So we'll make sure that there's some kind of a link to Salad Master for you. It's not cheap at all. I'll tell you, it's an investment. But Penny and I have been using Salad Master for probably, 15 years now. And I would never go back, because when they do their demonstration, like they'll bring a Teflon pan, and most of the manufacturers say that Teflon does not leak out. In fact, I've never seen a single manufacturer say that Teflon leaks into the food. And they boil water in a Teflon pan, and they throw about a tablespoon of baking soda in it. And then they let you smell the water after it's been boiling for a couple of minutes, and it just reeks of plastic and Teflon. And if you're brave enough, you can taste it, but I would never taste that. But the Salad Master I found to be world-class stuff. So that's just a tip for those of you that do have the money and want to invest in something really good. You'll be right there with me and my family eating from surgical steel cookware, which is just awesome. Jo, in Chapter 5, Making Every Mouthful Count, in Chapter 5, Making Every Mouthful Count, I thought that was a very important chapter. What are some key points that you feel are relevant based on our discussion that maybe we haven't covered today, particularly for parents?
Making every mouthful count is really about, making sure that your pennies you spend, the money that you spend on your food is accounted for. And perhaps I think, we have covered quite a few points on that today. Perhaps something that we haven't covered is, just in terms of how you can use a whole animal, from even if you're buying a whole chicken and, you are putting the carcass into a stock and, you're not spending extra money on buying cartoned stock. If you've had a roast chicken, then you can use the carcass and make a beautiful homemade stock. That's just a real simple example of, again, making every mouthful count. I think that, again, learning how to turn leftover food into another meal is, leftovers are perfectly good, high quality food if the source of that product in the first place was high quality. Then it's how can I create another meal from what is left over. And then, again, making every mouthful count is thinking about the cuts of meat that you're using, especially, if meat is a predominant part of your meals, then there are certain cuts of meat that will go further. things like good premium, clean mince, how you can work with that and bulk it out with other vegetables, etc., can extend, if you like, the product to getting more value from it.
You mean ground meat, right? Because mince is not a term that's used in United States, maybe Canada, but mostly you hear that in Australia, New Zealand, and England.
Yeah, okay, so for you guys, ground, a quality source of ground meat. So I think that, there are some simple other additional ways of making sure that every mouthful counts and that your wallet is accounted for.
Well, I can add one right out of HLC training, and that is this simple tip. Drink your food and eat your water. Chew your food until it's liquid. Take your time. Be present. Give thanks for the amazing blessing that Mother Nature has provided food for you and the miracle of that. Smell it. Feel what's happening inside your body. Use it as a meditation to see and learn to feel energy and vitality and nutrition moving through you. And don't just slam water. Put enough water in your mouth and then move it around in your mouth for a little bit like you were chewing food, because that gives your saliva time to mix with the water. And your saliva carries life force and enzymes that ultimately help you to digest what's in your stomach. So it can both of those can greatly enhance digestion and vitality. And that really is making every mouthful count right there. And it's probably one of the simplest but most important things we could do.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, Joe, oh, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. We're running quite late here. We're 2 hours and 11 minutes in, and I wanted to try to keep us to 2 hours, but I get so into these things, I get excited like a little boy. Maybe you could just give us a quick tip on what is up for you now. What's your next exciting thing that you're doing professionally, and where are you growing most in your personal life?
Well, I think, a couple of areas. For me, Bhavana Organic Farm and Cooking School up in Byron Bay has been, a beautiful project that was birthed a couple of years ago and continues to grow and is a beautiful adjunct to the coaching that I do. It's a place that people can come. It's a 110-acre organic farm that we've created a cooking school on.
Excellent.
And we're in the throes of going through building, going through the process of getting permission for eight luxury villas to go on the property, so that we can start having more of a retreat experience for people. At the moment, they come and they have a day experience at the school, and they come and harvest in the garden, and then we go back into the kitchen and then we cook, and it's filled with education around, obviously, our soils that we use and how we farm and the food and everything that we teach in HLC 1 and 2, and it becomes a practical experience of that. So that's a beautiful project that continues to grow and fills my heart. On a personal level, I'm just about to finish. I'm about 10 months into another 12-month Sacred Mystery School, which I've just loved. It's probably been one of the deepest ones I've done so far, and on a personal level is taking me to new places within myself, and my work is something that I'm loving at the moment. That I just surrendered to was the guidance to offer a 12-month self-mastery course for young men, and
wow.
I was a bit blown away when Spirit said to me, "Yes, you're to teach this path of light self-mastery course, and that it's to be an all-male group." And I was just like, "Really? How does that work? I'm a female. How does that work? I'm about to take 16 males through this 12-month course." But lo and behold, I surrendered to the guidance, and they all beautiful young men came out of the woodwork and said, yep, we want to do this. This is what we've been looking for. And so we're 4 weeks into basically a 11 month course. And it's mind blowing. It's absolutely mind blowing. It's beautiful. It's all consciousness work, all about learning about the divine masculine and divine feminine, and opening to the path of mystery. And I love it. So, that's really come about because I've surrendered more to my truth and what my soul is calling me to do. And I think there's a big healing in there for me as well, for my divine masculine. And so these are things I'm, continuing to open myself to and loving it.
Yeah, one of the things that you and I were talking about is it's in the cards now to have Jo Rushton do a series of videos for the CHEK Institute's CHEK Flicks program on how to cook.
Yes, it is. There's we haven't set a date for the release yet, but that is absolutely in the pipeline. We're going to create a cooking series, finally take all the principles of the nutrition that the CHEK Institute teach and make it into a practical, accessible learning platform for people to actually get into the kitchen and follow the guidance that I'm going to show them.
I bet you Penny and Angie are going to make me go through that course just so that they can say, okay, now that you know how to cook, we're taking off on vacation. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
That's it. I'll be coming over and saying, what's for dinner, Paul?
And I'll be saying, I was asking you the same. So one thing I wanted to share about your book, because we haven't touched on that, there's a lot of recipes in the book. So the book really teaches you a lot of things. It's a very complete, very beautiful, it's full color, lots of gorgeous pictures, easy to follow. Anybody that can read at, 6th grade level could really enjoy the book. And so we're selling your book through the CHEK Institute. There will be an announcement right when we finish this interview, where to get it, and a discount offer for you listeners. And Jo, if people want to find out more about you and the various other things you're doing, from programs for men, where is the best place for people to find Jo Rushton?
Look, I've got a new website that's under construction at the moment, which will be joannarushton.com, but it's not live yet. In the meantime, you can find me on bhavanaCookingSchool.com. Bhavana.
How do you spell that?
BHAVANA.
BhavanaCookingSchool.com. Yes. And I've seen pictures of the place that you sent me. It's stunningly beautiful. I'm really excited about what you're doing there.
It is beautiful. Hopefully one day you'll come and visit.
I will. As soon as I can just muster up enough desire to get on an airplane, me and airplanes. But as you know, I do get over there now and then, and I will, and I've got a lot of people to visit. So, and it's a good excuse to do more podcasts. So we'll make it happen. And hey, great interview, Jo. Thank you for sharing your life, your wisdom, your experience with so many things, your tips, your beautiful book, and your beautiful presence.
And ditto. Same back to you, my love. Thank you so much for all that you bring to the world. You have been absolutely instrumental in my life, and I am forever grateful for all that you've brought.
Thank you. Well, we hope you all enjoyed the show, and Penny will now tell you how to get a discount on Jo's amazing book, Rocket Fuel on a Budget, How to Get Healthy Without Going Broke. We'll see you soon with another exciting podcast.
Thank you for listening to Living 4D with Paul Chek and today's guest, Jo Rushton. Follow Jo on Facebook at facebook.com/Joanna.Rushton.52 or on Instagram at Jo_Rushton_. Get your own copy of Jo's book, Rocket Fuel on a Budget, at CHEKinstitute.com/shop. And until April the 30th, save 10% by using the code LIVING4D at checkout. Follow Paul on Instagram and Twitter at Living4D Podcast or on his YouTube podcast channel, youtube.com/ youtube.com/living4d with Paul Chek. You can watch more on Paul's blog at paulcheksblog.com and the CHEK Institute's blog at chekinstitute.com/blog.